Good morning, Boulevard. Man, I love hearing that. That just always sounds so good. Hey, we brought in a new year this last year, new year and a new decade. How many of you stayed up till midnight to bring the new year in? Oh, yeah, getting crazy out there. How many of you were in bed by 12:05? Yeah, yeah, a bunch of raucous partiers here at Boulevard. Yeah, all right, good stuff. My wife and I had for about 5 days. We had all 14, 16 counting us in our house for about 5 days, and man, it was fun. We just have so much fun. Somebody said, I don't want to compare it, Dad, but this may have been the best year ever. We had a couple crazy games of wiffle ball. Everybody in the family out in the cul-de-sac playing some wiffle ball, and just had a really good time. I was jumping on the trampoline with some of the grandkids, and we just decided we had to name this whole thing, this whole craziness. And so we ended up with kind of a tie between the Moss Mayhem Motel and the Cousin Chaos Camp. I'm not sure which one of those best describes it, but just had a really good time. I don't know about you, but the new year kind of causes me to be maybe a little bit more reflective. Does that happen for you? You can pull away for a few minutes or something amidst the craziness. You kind of think about the last year, and you think about maybe if you don't make real resolutions, you think about something you'd like to be different, in your new, as a new year comes along. And so I just want to, it's a time maybe to examine ourselves spiritually a little bit, and just to kind of look at, hey, what do we want to be different? Have I gotten lazy somewhere? And so I just want to ask you a couple questions real quick before we get started this morning. First of all is this. Who invited you to the party? Who invited you to the party? By that, what I mean by that is this. Who began to influence you early on in your life, or whenever it happened, for the gospel? Who began to make it plain and clear to you at some stage in your life that there was a God greater than you? You were not God. He was. That He loved you, that you were special in His heart, that He had a plan for you and wanted more than anything through His Son Jesus to spend eternity with you. Who was that for you? And maybe it was a parent who kind of laid that foundation, or a grandparent, or whatever. Maybe it was a neighbor or a teacher. I don't know who it might be. And then I will ask you also, were there other people? Maybe there was a person who really was just kind of a spiritual influence to you, kind of that wise person, that guide, that mentor, that maybe for you somehow kind of opened the doors, to what the experience of being a follower of Jesus was really about. Maybe they brought you from kind of a works-based thing to kind of a grace-based thing, or they taught you something special about how you could serve. Who were those people for you? Here's the next question. What kind of hot mess would your life be like if you didn't have those people in your life? Huh? Have you ever thought about? Have you ever just thought about creating a vacuum, and those people, however many there were, whoever they were, are kind of sucked out of your life, and you're just where you're at now without that influence, without that wisdom, without that understanding of God that they gave you? I feel like we kind of skip a beat here. James and I spend about 5 days. We did this last couple of Septembers, sitting in a cabin, and we are talking about what we want to be preaching about for next year, what we believe the needs of this particular family of believers are, and what we believe God wants us to be teaching them from the Word. And so we were doing that. But before we do that, even months ahead, we're already talking about some of those things. And so several months before September, one of the things we talked about was that how much we love this congregation of people, how much we love this family. And in this family, there's a lot of health. In this family, there are people who, if they see a need, they just step into it. There are people who sacrifice resources if they see a need. I mean, this is a family of believers, as James said, that really, our mission statement is really in our hands and our feet. I mean, it takes place. I mean, this is a group of people who loves deeply. And when we say people matter to God, we really practice that regardless of where they come from or what their story is. And a lot of good things. There's a lot of health and maturity in this group of people. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But sometimes I think with as we grow in our lives, and I think it happens physically, I think it happens relationally, it happens spiritually, certainly, that sometimes as we grow in our lives and we grow spiritually, a couple of things happen. Some of the demons that we fought with earlier in our life, we begin to get a hold of those things. Obedience seems like it comes a little quicker or easier for us in some ways. We begin to develop some spiritual habits that feed us. And along with that, sometimes as we move into the life of the church, into the life of the Christ follower, sometimes some of the relationships and friendships that we've had in the past seem to kind of go on the wayside for whatever reason, and our circle begins to be primarily people who are followers of Jesus. And that's not all a bad thing. But as a result of that, one of the things that does happen most often is that we begin to kind of lose that intentionality to share what God has done in our lives. The time that He intersected with our lives and brought His grace in, and our story became a God story. As James and I talked, we realized that we felt like maybe, despite the maturity of our people, that maybe that was something that we had lost our edge in that way. And so we're just going to we're going to spend 4 weeks on a series we're calling simply "Bring Your One." And the whole purpose of this is for us to kind of not just go out and just witness, but maybe even more so, get a handle on how good God has been in our own lives and the grace He has done, so that witnessing and that sharing can come naturally as we have that kind of a reigniting of what God has done in our lives and our own God story, so that we might begin to be intentional again and open our eyes to opportunities to share our God story with other people. And that's what Bring Your One is all about. Thinking about this, and I just want to be honest with you that I fit in that category. The fact that I feel like I've grown in my own relationship with God also means in some ways that my circle of friends has become primarily Christian people, and so have not been as intentional about that. I just hope that doesn't disappoint you severely. I struggle with the same things that you folks struggle with. Okay? I want you to know that. And so I've just been thinking about a couple things that I think need to happen in my life, and I am asking God to do in my life. And I'm going to share those 3 things with you, all right? Not that that's all there is, but here's what I believe needs to happen in our lives for us to begin to become intentional again about sharing our God story with others so that they can have their own God story. Number 1 is this: I must remember my own God story. In order for me to share my God story, I must remember my own God story. Again, that time when God in His grace and His plan for my life intersected at whatever point in time with my life, I must remember my own God story. Realized a number of years ago in counseling that a lot of times we can take a person or take a couple who might be struggling in a counseling situation, may have some deep-rooted, some deep core problems. And rarely is counseling a 3 or 4 week kind of thing. Sometimes it ends up being a whole year. And I realized that sometimes as I shared with people and as we talked and listened to them, that sometimes they would come through from a bad spot in their life or their relationship or marriage, and they would come through the desert, and they would come out on the other side, and there would be kind of this heavy breath. And all of a sudden I realized there was kind of a forgetting of the journey that God had them on. And I understand a little bit because it was unpleasant. But I also realize, as you probably do too, that there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that desert. And there's a lot of faith. And there's a lot of times that we realize in the desert how little we have and how much He is, and that He is always present with us. We forget the journey. And sometimes the journey is the primary thing that God wants us to remember, because if nothing else, on the other side, He wants us to look back and find someone else in the desert so we can reach back and bring them up. And the same way we do that, I think, in counseling situations or relationships, I think we do that with God sometimes. It's that we struggle with a sin, we struggle with a temptation, we struggle with some kind of issue, we struggle with a fear. And we come through that desert and we get out on the other side, we breathe a sigh of relief, and then we have a tendency to forget how hard and long and desperate the struggle was. And yet that's the very thing, again, that makes our story so strong, because it makes God a part of our story. And that's the thing that when we share it with others, points to God, and we can say to them, I had nothing. I had no strength left of my own. I didn't know what to do. I was failure after failure after failure. But God. But God gave me strength. But God was faithful. But God was always there. And folks, let me just remind you, I think we need to go back. Sometimes we just need to take time to go back. Paul reminds us, in case our forgetter is overactive, let me read from what Paul says in Ephesians 2 to the people of Ephesus. These people who were once living in dark and now are part of the church. Once you were dead because of your disobedience and your many sins. You used to live in sin, just like the rest of the world, obeying the devil, the commander of the powers in the unseen world. All of us used to live that way. How is that way? Following the passionate desires and inclinations of our sinful nature. By our very nature, we were subject to God's anger, just like everyone else. Just a reminder of where we once were before Christ's grace intersected with our lives. And folks, I know that going back for some of us is not what we want to do. And I'm not talking about going back into the behavior, into the lifestyle. I'm just talking about opening the door for a memory for a moment. To get a real, honest, ruthless memory of what life was like before God came into our life. And I know that can be hard. Because sometimes when we open that door to look back, we are reminded again of how shattered things were. Of the life possibly that we shattered because of our bad decision making. Life destroyed and maybe unhealed wounds. It's hard sometimes to open that door just for even a moment to look back. And then I would think there's people who don't want to open the door because they don't want to see what that's like. And then other of us need to open the door to remember our God story for different reasons. I put it like this. If our God story is more of a I'm good story, we will have a difficult time with people's bad stories. You have the same response to that first service did. What I'm saying is this. If when we open the door and we attempt to go back, and like that aging high school athlete who is a lot better now than he really was back then on the field, happens all the time, doesn't it? If we have a tendency to when we see other people struggling, we like, I can't believe they keep failing in that. I can't believe they can't get over that. I can't believe they made that decision. Can you believe how stupid people can be? We need to open that door and look back and realize once again where we have come from. And maybe our life, maybe it wasn't a life of devastating sin or shame or whatever. Maybe instead we're a person who have built a Christian life of morality, a Christian life of religious bricks, one upon the other, feeling good about ourselves as we built this palace around ourselves. And let me remind you folks again, or let me, Paul, remind you of what he says to the people in Rome. To the answer of the fact that we are not and have never been made right, you and I, by our obedience to the law. And Paul says this, we are made right with God by placing our faith in Jesus Christ, and this is true for everyone who believes, no matter who we are. For everyone has sinned, he says, and we all fall short of God's glorious standard. Man, some really good things happen when you and I will take the moment with the intent of sharing our God story with others, when we may take the time to actually open the door and go back to our own God story and think about it and consider it and think about it clearly again. Well, one of the things that happens is that when we are reminded again that God's grace did intersect with my life, man, it begins kind of a spiritual spark. I mean, sometimes, again, as we get older and more mature, we begin almost to get more independent of God because we gain strength. And we just naturally kind of think, I've got this on my own. Something we used to lean into God fully on, now we just kind of got this. We had those disciplines in our life. We don't struggle with that sin so much anymore. And so we can lose the spark, we can lose the passion for Christ that being wholly dependent and leaning into Him causes in our life. Going back does that. Over Thanksgiving, we met with Dawn's family, and there was like 50 or 60 for Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, it was a big old crew. And so one thing we couldn't find a house, and so we actually met at a college up in Joplin. And we had their gymnasium and their student union, and we spread out tables and had this great time. And so it was actually the college where Dawn and I attended, all right? And so we pull in the parking lot, and I have a couple of our grandkids in the back. And when I pulled in the parking lot, just this kind of weird thing happened. I looked across the other side of the parking lot and at the little parking stalls. And something came to my mind. And so I walked over to this particular parking area, all right? And I remembered that I wasn't not sure if it was exactly that one, but it was like this one or that one was the parking stall where Dawn and I were sitting in the car the first time I ever kissed her. All right? And so I went and got Dawn. I said, hey, come over here. I didn't tell her, and I went and got her, you know. And then two of my grandkids were there, and so I said, hey, grandkids, come over here. And Knox, who's kind of like intuitive, kind of looks at me like, kind of gives me this weird look, you know. And so I said, hey, guys, I said, guess what happened right here? And I said, this is the place where I kissed Umal for the first time. Well, you know, grandkids don't ever think Umal should be kissing anybody. And so the response, and I just thought this was a really, really cool moment, you know. And so I was just beaming. And Knox looked up at me and he said, Pops, I think I'm going to throw up. And Ella, who is 11, says, Pops, that is way too much detail. Regardless of the response from the next generation, I realized that just sitting there for just a moment and thinking back for just a few seconds kind of reignited some things in me, just making me realize how God had gotten us to that place and what started and what has taken place since then. My heart was just, if I can say, kind of warmed. My relationship with Dawn, once again. When we remember honestly our God story, sparks begin to happen again in our life that may not have been there for a while. And also this happens, that when we are living daily, remembering and experiencing His grace, that reminds me to share that grace with others. Folks, when we forget on a daily basis that it is all about God's grace, then and now, then terrible things happen to our spiritual lives. But when we live building things into our life so that we are continually reminded of God's grace, so we can thank Him, so that we can recognize then that overflows. And I am looking for opportunities to share that grace that God has given with me with other people. So I would encourage you just practically to return to that place. I would encourage you to write it out. Maybe write out your own God story. Just take a couple pages, and it doesn't have to be a long thing. Just write, you know, here's where I was. Here's what life looked like. This was the hot mess that I was in. Here's what happened. Here's how life has been different. And you know, folks, I think God will use. I think He will use those things, that writing, that stopping, to begin to change again and bring back something, a passion in your life, a tenderness, so that your eyes will begin to open up and gain 20/20 vision to see people so you can become a vessel for sharing His grace. Second thing I think that we need to do in order for us to become intentional about sharing our God story is this, that I must remember that my friend who doesn't know Christ is lost for eternity. Folks, I know that is a prickly subject. And I just realized about 15 minutes ago that speaking about hell in your first week in the new role might cause for the shortest tenure of a lead pastor ever. I don't know. But folks, I know that's not popular. I know that doesn't set well with people. That we live in a culture that religion has become, or spirituality has become, primarily very, very pragmatic. If it works for me, if a little bit of this and a little bit of that works for me, and you have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and that works for you, then that's okay for me, and that's okay for you, and I should be okay with whatever you have. And honestly, and I take responsibility for this, that in some ways the church has had our own doings in some of that misguidedness. Because well-meaning and probably appropriate in some ways, we have called the lost seekers. We have called them searchers. And we have referred sometimes to sin as issues. And I have done that too many times in my own counseling. And we have attempted in some ways to kind of redefine this loving God as God's love as the fact that hey, He just loves us and cares for us and is crazy about us, and everybody's in regardless of what you believe. Folks, listen. There is no Bible spokesman who places more emphasis on a real hell as the final consequences of God's judgment, of condemnation, than Jesus. Matthew 25:41, Jesus says, "Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons.'" 5 verses later, Jesus says, "And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go to eternal life." 20 times. 20 times Jesus likens hell to a fire. And folks, we have to be very, very careful. Very, very, very careful in a pragmatic culture where it seems so loving for me to do it my way and you do it your way and your way should be okay with my way. We have to be very, very careful that we do not wander from the truth. And it does not make God less loving, but it does make Him the just God that He is. So how do we escape? How do we escape? How have we? And how do we share with another how we escape that condemnation? Paul is so clear when he writes to Romans, "And since we have been made right in God's sight by the blood of Christ, He will certainly save us from God's condemnation. For since our friendship with God was restored by the death of His Son while we were still His enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of His Son." I got this gift just the other day from one of my friends. He's always sending stuff out, and he just got a great sense of humor. It was funny, made me laugh, and it also made me remember. His name is Kevin. Some of you have heard me talk about Kevin a little bit. Kevin's a guy that moved actually from Tulsa to my hometown in Missouri when he was about 8th grade, and we played some football together and ended up playing in a rock and roll band together for a couple of years. And Kevin was a good guy. I mean, he's just a good guy, a good friend, a lot of fun to be with. I won't go into the whole story, but basically the short of it is that one summer after my junior year that I had a chance to go to a couple camps, and at camps I became convicted, and my life was, although I'd already been a Christian, my life was kind of transformed at a new level about living for Christ and what that meant. And also during that time there were some men who talked and preached about this very thing, that without without the blood of Christ and our faith, that we have nothing to look forward to except eternal condemnation. And I became convinced of that. And when I came home from camp, and I do not say this to exaggerate, I came in, I'd been gone all summer long. And I put my bags down and I said hello to my mom and dad. And I said, Mom and Dad, I got to go talk to Kevin. And I went out where he and I and all our friends used to drive up and down Kings Highway, and I found him driving up and down, and I got in the car and I said, honestly, I don't even know what I said. I really don't even know. But somehow he understood through my unintelligible offering of the gospel. And he made a decision soon after that to become a follower of Jesus. And he's still a follower of Jesus. He's one of my closest friends in the world, a guy I lean into in my life for spiritual wisdom and guidance. And folks, I tell you that because I was 17 and I was dumb. And I didn't know what to say. And I didn't share with Kevin. I can tell you this for sure. I didn't share with Kevin so his life would be better. I didn't share with Kevin. Because he was a bad guy. Because he wasn't a bad guy. He was a very moral, kind, loving kind of guy. He was a great friend. I jumped in that car on that Friday night when I was 17 years old, determined to share something with him, because along the way I'd become convinced that without Christ, he was going to spend eternity away from God in hell. And I don't know, sometimes that reality is just needed. Sometimes we just have to remind ourselves that that's the way it is. And that they might be searchers and they might be seekers, but they are lost. And yeah, as we share with them, we need to share with them with respect. And we need to share with them with wisdom. And we need to look for right timing. But we also need to have an urgency about sharing the love and grace of Jesus Christ with our friends. And we need to be looking for those opportunities. What does it look like? What do the lost look like? Man. The lost is that really nice older couple who live right next to you, and she brings the warm cookies, and he mows your lawn every once in a while, and they're so kind and so loving, and they take care of your house when you're gone, but they don't know Jesus. And the lost is that single mom who sits next to you on the bleachers at your kids' ball games and occasionally tells you stories more than you want to know about what she did on Friday night. And the lost are that really, really cool, successful-looking couple who seem to have so much together. They're always holding hands. Their kids seem to so good, and they live in a cul-de-sac with you, and everything just seems to be so good for them. But they don't know Christ. It's that mom doing class parties with you. It's that person that's sitting next to you at work. It's the bank clerk that you see every week when you deposit your money or get some cash out for groceries or whatever you're doing. We got to remember on God's story. We got to remember that people without Christ are facing an eternal hell without God. And I think last of all, and the first two in a sense point to the third, and that is this, that we must remember, you and I must remember, folks, that each person matters much to the heart of God. They matter much to the heart of God. Luke 15, Jesus does this very unusual thing. In Luke 15, Jesus is hanging out with these particular kind of people. Luke says this, tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. And this made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Eating with someone was a big thing back then. Verse 3. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me! I found my lost sheep!" And in the same way, there's more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. Jesus tells a second story about a woman who has 10 silver coins and loses one, and she clears out the whole house and sweeps and searches until she finds it. He tells a third story. This is so important. This is so important that these religious teachers, these religious leaders understand that these notorious sinners and tax collectors matter mightily to the heart of God, that he tells not one story and not two stories. He takes 3 stories to nail the nail into the wood so they will understand. I don't know a place in Scripture where Jesus does that any other time. These people, your friends, your neighbor, your coworker, matter mightily to the heart of God. And we know they're valuable. We know they're valuable because of what happens. We know they're valuable because the shepherd leaves the value of the 99 to go after the one. And he searches, and he doesn't just search and go like part of the way out across the pasture or across down the creek and up, and then he turns around and goes, "Oh, I can't find it." He comes back. He searches until he finds it. And the woman clears out everything in her living room and gets out the lamp and the broom until she finds it. The value of these people. And Jesus, in each one of the stories, uses the word, get this, lost. There was a sheep that was lost. There was a coin that was lost. And in the third story, he talks about a son that was lost. And their value is shown in the fact that what they lost or what they gave up to go search was valuable. And their value was found in the fact that there was a search at all. And the value was found in the fact that they searched until they found it. And then it says of the shepherd that he took this sheep and he put him over his shoulders and he walked the long walk home. When I was a kid, my grandpa, who lived up in northeast Missouri, had sheep. Sheep aren't really white. If you've been around sheep at all, unless you take them through the car wash about every other day, sheep don't really stay white. I know what the kids' books say. But I've been out in the pasture with my grandpa's sheep enough to know they're dirty. They got poop all over them. Their feet get feet rot. They smell nasty. And they're dumb. And they're heavy. And so when he takes that sheep and he throws it over his head and he starts to long search back, that is not a pretty picture. His head is not in a good location. And I'm just going to say this, and I could be proven wrong. I was reading this, and I found myself wanting to find a shepherd who I know no shepherds, and just ask the shepherd really honestly. Just tell me. Honestly, if one walks away, do you really actually leave the 99 like to the coyotes and wolves? Do you really do that? Or is Jesus making a point here? I don't know. It seems ridiculous to me over the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. I just think Jesus wants us to know here how much he values those people who have not had a chance to hear about the grace of God. And let's not forget that there was great rejoicing. Great rejoicing when he got back. Called all the other shepherds, called the neighbors. The woman who lost the coin, great rejoicing. When the son comes back, and we didn't have time to plunge into that story, maybe later. When the son comes back, the father is waiting at the driveway for him, and man, he throws a crazy party when the lost are found. God and his angels rejoice because of that value. So folks, here's what we're about. Here's what we're about. If you choose to be a part of what's here at Boulevard. We are a caring community of Christians committed to reaching the lost and helping them to find Christ and to become committed Christ followers. We exist, folks. We exist to help people find Christ. And I'm going to tell you that is going to happen much more often through you sharing your God story with someone else more than will happen than just someone listening to me or whoever happens to be on the stage. It'll happen because you care, and it will happen because you share. More often than not. But we exist for that reason. And so again, what we're going to do here is all about helping people find Christ. And what we're going to say is all about helping people find Christ and then helping people follow Christ. And our value, one of our core values here is all people matter to God. And man, if I had a few minutes, I could just go on and on about the stories that our people, how they live that out. It doesn't matter the background. It doesn't matter the economic situation. It doesn't matter what they were doing or what they are doing now. They are loved. They matter to God. So you matter to us. And our promise to you as a staff, and we can't make this all happen because you are really the church. But as a staff, I can tell you this. We are promised this year to do things better than we've ever done before so that we can meet and help people find Christ and help people follow. We are doing it better. We are committed to examination and working at doing it better so people can hear the gospel of Christ more clearly. And we are committed to putting it on the bottom shelf so anybody who walks in here can hear the gospel and know exactly what it means that God loves them. Man, folks, wish I could pour the coffee with you. Wish I could pour the coffee with you. I don't think that we can do this on our own. I've tried to regain that heart to look for opportunities, and I can't do it on my own. And I've had to go to God and say, God, you're going to have to do something in this hardened heart to help me see the lost like you see the lost. And be able to take the risk to share my God story with them. You're going to have to do that in me. That's my prayer that I'm praying. I'm trying to pray it regularly. And so just because you're my brothers and sisters in Christ, because if we're commanded to share that gospel with others, that I'm going to ask you that you would begin to be praying this prayer. Show me my one. Show me my one. Who's the person that you desire, God, for me just to look for an opportunity to share my God story with? Give me an opportunity. Give me a word. Don't let me wait until I think I've got the perfect little presentation down. Just help me to go for it. Help me do it with grace and respect and wisdom, but just show me who that person is. And then open my eyes to see other people the way you see them. And then help me to share. Help me to take a step in building that relationship, in building trust, so when I do speak, that I have enough care behind my words that they know I mean what I'm saying, and I say what I mean out of love. Maybe this morning, because we kind of assume that everybody has made that step and has a God story, but maybe you don't. Now, God's working on you. Has been since He created you. But maybe you've never felt like your life intersected with God. Maybe you've never understood His grace. And maybe just you're sitting there and don't believe in your heart of hearts that you really matter to the God of heaven. But I'm here to tell you this morning that you do. You look. You were made in His image, and you look like the Father who created you. He cares for you deeply. So much so that He would search. And He will never quit searching until you surrender your life to Him. And you might say, well, God, Steve, I don't feel that love. That's not something I feel. And I'm going to tell you, you don't have to. You don't have to feel it. Because He didn't just speak it, He demonstrated His love for you in this, that while we were yet sinners, Romans says, while you and I were yet sinners, Christ died. He went beyond the words to prove that you were valuable to Him, and He gave His Son as a sacrifice on a cross so that your sins could be removed and so that you could be in a right relationship with the Father. He demonstrates that you are valuable to Him. You don't have to feel it. You can know it. And maybe if that's where you're at today, I'm just asking. Maybe you've got a question, and we would love, as we sing in just a moment, if you just want to come up and say, hey, I'm not there yet, I just got a question. Next week at 9 o'clock in B306, we're going to have a Discover Boulevard class, and we just say, ask any question you want to ask. You can pull any one of us aside. You can email any one of us staff and say, hey, could we just get together for a cup of coffee and talk? We want to answer those questions. We want you to know that God is a God who loves you and has a plan for your life through His Son, Jesus Christ. And He wants to spend eternity with you. Let's go from here, ready to go back to that place, ready to change the way we see other people, looking for opportunities to share what God has done in our life and what He can do in the life of that person who does not know Christ. Let's stand, folks, and sing about the love of Christ.